of God. First, before I start, I'd just like to thank the people that worked very hard to do all of this that you're seeing here today, the effort. There's a lot of people behind this effort, and sometimes they're forgotten in the actual spectacle of events. The people that come before everything and set up everything, and the people that go out of their way to do things like this, to put flowers there, which is always a feminine touch. So I'd like to thank Khadija O'Connell, who did, and I hope everybody, inshallah, make a prayer for her and her family and her husband, who happens to be on Hajj right now, and she stayed behind to hold down the fort. That's why they say behind every great man is a great woman, and behind every great woman is herself. And also for the volunteers here at Zaytuna, and all of the guests, and Imam Zaid also, who took time from his community because he has a thriving community on the East Coast, and he took time from his community to come out and spend some time with us on the Eid. This program, it was Ramis who was introducing us, who had this idea of using this occasion, and he mentioned the reasons for that, as a way of celebrating the days of Eid and the Hajj, and also celebrating Malcolm, or Malik Shabazz. And I think that it's appropriate and fitting that we celebrate the life of Malcolm and not the death of Malcolm on the approximate anniversary of his death, because it's actually his life that I think brings so many interesting aspects to the American Muslim phenomenon. Imam Malik Shabazz was once asked why he became Muslim, and he said, and when I read this quote I was very struck by it, he said that my people came from Africa, and he said if we were always told that they were ignorant people there, but if you go back you'll find that many of the people that came here were Muslims. Their religion was Islam, and they had great civilizations in Africa. And Malcolm said that in the early 60s, when there was actually almost no work had been done on the Muslim presence in this country, over 500 years, and there's actually some research that indicates that there was pre-Columbian Islamic presence. It's not as solid, but it's an area of research. It's not as solid as the research that has proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that large segments of African Muslims were brought here as slaves, and they set up Quran schools, and they attempted to maintain their religion in spite of a society that was stripping them not only of their religion but of their dignity, of their clothes, of everything. I actually met an African American woman who wore a hijab, and I said, "Are you Muslim?" She said, "No." And I asked her why she was wearing a hijab. She said, "Because when my ancestors were brought here, they were stripped of their clothes. So I just want to wear the clothes like the Muslims have, so that nobody can strip me of my clothes." And so these people that came here and lived as Muslims in this land despite all these odds, and I recommend all of you to read a book by Sylvian Diouf called The Servants of Allah. And it's a beautiful book, which was a result of Alan Austin's research, a very wonderful professor who we brought here for the Forgotten Roots Conference. He did the research. Now I want to show you the impact of a man's life. Because in a sense you can't measure a man's life or a woman's life by the appearances of their life. There's elements in a biography that will never emerge in a book. the biography of a person. And if you look at Malcolm's life, one of the important touchstones for me growing up was a television series called Roots, which occurred in the 70s. And people don't know that was because of Malcolm. That he said when he told Alex Haley, you know, that we were Muslims. And Alex Haley took that seriously, and he started researching and found out it was true. Well, Michener, who wrote Hawaii and other books, he read the work of Alex Haley and said, that's a load of rubbish. And he wrote an article in the Reader's Digest saying that that's just fantasy. That's Malcolm X's fantasy. There weren't any Muslims here. Well, Alan Austin read that article. And Alan Austin spent the next several years of his life writing an 800-page academic documentation of the presence of several million Muslims in this country. I mean, this is something phenomenal if you think of that. That's all from this one man. And if you look, like Imam Zaid pointed out, his mother, his father, his environment, all of those extraordinary elements that came together to make that man. And I just, last week, I was with his daughter, Atayla Shabazz. And one of the things that she said about Malcolm, she said, we saw a side of him in the home that a lot of people did not ever see. She said he was a gentle soul in the house. And he didn't teach us anything that would inculcate anger or hatred in our hearts. She said he never taught anything like that to his children. And so when you look at him and his transformation, the power to me in Malcolm is that, rahimahullah, is that he was on a spiritual path from day one. And he was evolving. And he was somebody who was big enough to jettison whatever he was carrying when he recognized it was no longer necessary to carry it. Everything in his life, as far as I'm concerned, was a necessary event. Because a man's life is the aggregate of the moments that make up his life. The fact that he became a criminal was necessary to understand something about the conditions of oppressed people and the alternatives that oppressed people have. And if you look at Ibn Khaldun, one of the great thinkers and sociologists of human history, he is a human figure. He is not the property of Muslims. In the book by Mark Van Doren, or Charles Van Doren, his son, called The History of Knowledge, one of the acknowledgments he gives in that book, in the section on acknowledgement, was to Ibn Khaldun. Toynbee, who wrote a book called Toynbee's History, which is over 10 volumes. The most influential historian on his life was Ibn Khaldun. So people read Toynbee's history and they don't realize they're influenced by a 9th century Moroccan, Tunisian, Andalusian scholar. So all of these extraordinary influences that are out there, and so many of these influences came together in his life, this man, Malik Shabazz. Entering into the nation of Islam was necessary phase for him because he had to break something in himself. And what he was breaking was what Ibn Khaldun says happens to oppressed people, which is indolence, which is trickery, which is attempts to escape responsibility, because that has been removed from them. Like Imam Zayd said, if somebody's always, every time you get into the race, there's a foot there to trip you, it's very difficult to stay in the race. And when the other ones are so far ahead of you, you can lose hope and just give up and not want to run anymore. So he had to understand all of those things, and that's why as he emerged out of that, he was able to address all of those things that he had experienced with a type of sincerity and legitimacy that you don't find in a theoretician. I can write a book of theory about how to solve the problems of drug addiction,